Greetings all! Today, we'll be examining relatively common ground type or ice steel type in the Alola region, Pokemon Sandshrew and its uncommon evolution Sandslash, the two collectively known as the Mouse Pokémon. Though they might not look outwardly threatening to the first to most, the members of the Sandshrew family are rough and tough little critters that can easily roll right over you if you can't stop them in their tracks. Sandshrew have small rugged bodies that are mostly covered in a thick yellowish almost brick-like hide that covers their back, tail, arms, legs, neck, and most of their head. The only exception to this are their beige bellies and their lower jaw area. They are also noted for their dark blue eyes, two white claws in both their hands and feet, and the small pointy ears that sit to the top and sides of their head. Their Alolan counterpart has a similar form to them, but their back and head have a thicker, more hunched appearance to them and are a bluish-white color around most of their armored hide, with it acting more as a rugged defensive shield than just a hide in practice. Their evolved form, Sandslash, have the same general form as their pre-evolved form, but are noted for the thinner yellow hide that covers most of their form, their claws having grown much longer with a curved shape as they further develop a sprig of hide material on their forehead alongside their larger, elongated ears. They are especially noteworthy for the massive cluster of dark brown, jagged, and flexible spines that cover their backs, making for a potent defensive measure against direct attack. Similarly, they too have an Alolan variant, and while most of their forms remain identical in structure, their bodies have a bluish-white color to them, and the spines on the back have been replaced with a series of organically generated icy spines for offense and defense. The hides of the members of the Sandshrew family are specifically designed to absorb and retain water with almost perfect efficiency, allowing them to survive relatively easily within arid locations without ever having to come into contact with pooled water. However, this has the unfortunate effect of rendering these creatures vulnerable to overhydration, and thus vulnerable to water-type attacks and simply water in general, verifying their classification as ground types. As such, the burrows that they live in, which can be made anywhere as they can shatter rocks and impede their digging progress with their sharp claws, are relatively deep and are situated far away from any source of water and always above the water table to prevent sudden flooding. This makes deserts particularly appealing to these creatures, as sand is equally useful for blinding enemies, cleaning off dirt and grime, and absorbing large quantities of water quickly and effectively, leading them to often cover their hides with the material as a barrier against moisture and regularly take sand baths. As a result, after a cold night in a sand burrow, a fine dune can often be seen covering their hides. The only drawback that comes with this is that Sandshrew in particular are not as well protected against heat as their evolved form Sandslash, so they usually only emerge from their burrows to hunt, digging holes in the ground in search of bug-type Pokemon to eat. Even then, these creatures will often prefer to stay at the lip of their burrows during the hottest hours of the day, lunging out only in brief intervals to swipe at and drag down any prey that unintentionally passed by the entrance of their home. The only time that they will willingly expose themselves to extreme heat is if they become overhydrated and their hides become wrinkled, at which point they will find a source of heat like a volcano, lying flat on the ground, allowing the geothermal heat to dry them out. When Sandshrew evolve, the hide on their back hardens and fractures, morphing into a series of sharp spines similar to the plate-like scales that cover pangolins. Although the spines are sturdy and rock-like and tend to be smooth and harder the drier the environment their owners are present in, they are nonetheless organic, falling out and regrowing on an annual basis, though they can be repaired within a day if they are damaged in battle. Sandslash is still able to curl up into a ball for defensive purposes, but the addition of these spines helps them prevent any internal injuries from bouncing and further makes it dangerous to come into physical contact with them. Aside from physical protection, the spines also serve as an effective heat shield, protecting Sandslash from heat stroke under extremely hot conditions. Sandslash possess greater control over their internal muscles than Sandshrew do, and thus can move around with full mobility while rolled up, granting them the ability to attack opponents directly with these spines. The added traction that they provide further grants Sandslash increased movement speeds while rolled up, which proves to be quite useful in the event of a necessary escape. When rolling around at high speeds, Sandslash tend to pick up and hurl a lot of dirt and debris behind them. Whether intentional or not, this blinding mobile dust storm can often prevent opponents from tracking Sandslash effectively, and thus can help them survive in the presence of otherwise daunting desert predators. As far as their abilities go, these creatures are noted for their capacity to use debris as camouflage, the natural body colors usually blending in readily with such environments, and thus they'll use the sand veil ability as an effective base ability. Though individuals that are able to instead use such debris in the air and ground to improve the overall traction when moving around can instead possess Sand Rush as a hidden ability. As far as the base stats are concerned, in the case of Sandslash, these creatures may not have the raw power and agility that some other ground types might possess, but they are at the very least sturdy and can take physical blows fairly well, the base defense stat being above average for fully evolved ground type Pokemon, so they're not completely without merit in battle. Since their hides are relatively thick and quite durable, much like those possessed by armadillos, Sandshrew possess a relatively high base defense stat for an organic creature of their size. More importantly though, their hides are quite flexible and are highly efficient at absorbing sudden impacts. As such, Sandshrew can protect their bodies, especially their soft bellies, from harm by curling up into an almost perfect sphere. They're able to do this almost instantly as a nerve reflex, allowing the hide to take the full brunt of any strike even at close range. This also makes transportation a bit of a breeze for them, as they can roll across the desert at high speeds to cover vast distances in a short amount of time. Because the hide is relatively elastic and highly shock absorbent, Sandshrew can save themselves from taking damage from a great fall by curling up and bouncing like a rubber ball. While this is a great defensive mechanism for arid and sometimes mountainous environments, this ability can also be dangerous in combat, as bipedal opponents can take advantage of their elastic hides to bounce them around like a basketball. In truth, Sandshrew are more likely to be knocked unconscious by too many strong impacts than they are to face damaged or compromised hides. Trainers should keep this in mind when training Sandshrew so they do not accidentally push them beyond the physical limits of their internal anatomy. It is also noted that Sandshrew are one of the few species of Pokemon known to have unique variant within the confines of the Alola region, though this form can also be found in the Blueberry Academy terrarium. In this form, these creatures are Ice-Steel types, possess the Snow Cloak ability as their primary ability instead of Sand Veil, and the Slush Rush ability as their hidden ability instead of Sand Rush, learn the Mist, Powder Snow, Metal Claw, Iron Defense, Iron Hand, Hail, and Blizzard moves instead of the Sand Attack, Poison Sting, Rollout, Bulldoze, Agility, Dig, Sandstorm, and Earthquake moves, and possess very slightly increased base defense and special defense stats, and a slightly decreased base special attack stat. While Sandshrew in the Alola region once used to be desert dwelling like the normal variants, repeated volcanic eruptions forced them out of their desert homes and up to the high-bound peaks of the region, forcing them to change and adapt to the bitterly cold weather in these areas. In order to handle the blistering cold temperatures of these high mountain peaks, these creatures have developed a thick, steel-hard plated hide and a shell of ice covering it to insulate them and maintain a stable body temperature, hence their assignment as Ice-Steel types. While this does help to protect them against the cold temperatures of the habitat and makes it hard for normal attacks to penetrate their shell and hide, it is also so large and heavy that it prevents them from curling up into a ball like their normal variant can. Moreover, the weight of the shell makes it harder for these creatures to move and in turn limits their overall mobility, but they are at least partially compensated by their claws, which have changed slightly in order to be better equipped to grasp and move across ice without slipping. These claws are equally useful for clinging to the ground in the case of a predatory attack, as the soft belly is still a prime target and they need to cling to the ground strongly to avoid being easily flipped over. When they need to move quickly, Alolan Sandshrew will get a small running start and leap to slide across snow and ice on their bellies like a curling rock. In fact, it is a common tradition during certain festivals in the Alola region to have competitions among natives to see how far one can slide an Alolan Sandshrew across a sheet of ice the farthest. While they might lack the flexibility of their normal variant, these creatures are still fairly hardy and can live peacefully for the most part, though they are sadly a favorite snack for Pokemon like Weavile in the wild. The only real problem for trainers is the fact that due to the change in lifestyle and form, Alolan Sandshrew can no longer evolve under normal circumstances. They can only evolve in the presence of an Ice Stone, though the increase in power they get from evolving can still more than make up for this. Aside from their spiny backs, Sandslash also possess incredibly long, sharp claws that can make more than a few opponents uncomfortable in battle. In combat, Sandslash will often use their claws to tear apart opponents after sufficiently stunning them with their back spines. As it turns out, their curved form makes them perfect for piercing and scooping large chunks of flesh out of unarmored enemies, and sharing grant them access to the powerful Crush Claw attack after evolution. Their curved nature also makes Sandslash excellent tree climbers, to the point where they can often be found throwing berries down to waiting Sandshrew that are hungry and sleeping in treetops, further amplifying the threat level within forested areas. Under the cover of leaves, a Sandslash can easily deliver devastating sneak attacks by rolling up into a ball and leaping from the top branches of a tree, letting the weight of its body drive its back spines into an opponent's flesh. In practical terms though, their claws are specifically designed for digging large burrows in gravelly terrain, as their curved form makes them perfect for scooping up large volumes of dirt. The only problem is that their claws are somewhat inelastic, breaking when too much force is applied to them at any one point. This often occurs when Sandslash dig at extremely fast rates as the limbs move too fast for them to carefully remove any stones or boulders that might impede their path. Thankfully, Sandslash is not limited by such occurrences for very long, as broken claws grow back completely within a day without losing their edge, and both them and their spines often prove useful for farmers, as the materials can be used to carve plows for tilling fields whenever they do break off or are left behind. It is lastly noted that Sandslash is also one of the few species of Pokemon known to have unique variant within the confines of the Alola region, though this form can also be found in the Blueberry Academy terrarium. Much as with their pre-evolved form, these creatures are also Ice-Steel types, possess the Snow Cloak ability as their primary ability instead of Sand Veil, and the Slush Rush ability as their hidden ability instead of Sand Rush, cannot learn Crush Claw, but but instead gain access to Metal Burst, Icicle Crash, and Icicle Spear, the latter most immediately after evolving, and possess a moderately decreased base special attack stat and slightly increased base defense and special defense stats. After exposing Alolan Sandshrew to the radiant power of an Ice Stone, these once desert-dwelling creatures shed their rounded ice shell that surrounds their plated skin, and instead grow a series of massive sharp ice spines on their backs that act as both camouflage and a deadly offensive weapon, as the spines can easily pierce through flesh and cause large, deep wounds that often require serious medical attention to address. These creatures are fairly benign for the most part, and try to avoid attacks from predators, burying themselves in the snow with only their back spines sticking up to deter a predatory attack until their attacker runs off. Much like the pre-evolved form, the thick hide and icy spines that coat the backs of these creatures makes it hard for them to move around and completely prevents them from curling up into a ball. But they are compensated in that they can use their large claws to carve through fields of snow and ice and easily climb up icebergs to get to their intended destinations in the wild, running as fast as they possibly can through snow-covered plains when digging as otherwise unnecessary. Strangely enough, the clouds of snow and ice that are sprayed behind the creatures as they dig are seen as beautiful to many locals in the Alolan region and are very popular among photographers. Unfortunately, because Alolan Sandslash live high up in the mountains, where it is easy to get stranded and thus dangerous to go, civilians are not allowed to go that high and enter their territory without explicit permission to do so. As with their counterpart, Alolan Sandslash are sturdy partners that can definitely take a beating in battle, but caution is still recommended when training them, as their frozen spines have been known to inflict frostbite on anyone that gets too close to said spines. This, combined with the fact that they have an above average base attack stat for a fully evolved Ice-type Pokemon, and an above average base defense stat for a fully evolved Ice and Steel-type Pokemon, can give them a unique advantage in certain situations and render them a harder foe to deal with than one might expect at first glance.
Although I might not be too keen on some types of rodents, these critters are honestly just fine to me and can be plenty of fun if you need a companion in the sweltering heat. Sandshrew may be small, but their resilient bodies can take a lot of punishment and make them more imposing than you might expect. Still, they do have to follow the laws of gravity, so as much as they can bounce like a ball, they aren't likely to feel all that well after a while. Sandslash can be a bit hard to approach because of large spines on their back and curved claws, but that just makes them all the more enticing for young trainers to get a hold of to experiment with. If they start to curl up though, you might want to get out of their way too, so you don't get turned into a pincushion otherwise. Of course, if you're more of a fan of the cold, then their Alolan counterparts can more than satisfy that itch. And while heat might do them in easily, their armored bodies can render them tough nuts to crack if you can't melt or pummel their defenses away easily.
Even if they might be more cute than dangerous to some, even in an evolved state, the members of the Sandshrew family are still tough mammals that can use their claws and the earth around them to take a solid stance in battle. Whether you need their ground-type attributes the most, or feel that an icy take on them is more called for, you'll be able to make them into a noble hassle as long as they don't get too wet outdoors. Just do yourself a favor though, and make sure you keep clear of their spines when outside, as the penchant for climbing everything might prove to be a deadly blunder if they lose their balance above you and try to land spine first to save themselves at your expense. Thank you all for watching this video. It is a great pleasure to share with you all the fruits of my research and all the positives it gives to understanding the wonderful creatures we call Pokemon and how their powers and behaviors function in their world. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more work like it, please give a like, comment, and or subscribe to the channel so you can get regular notifications on when new content is being uploaded. You can also find links to my DeviantArt page, Patreon, and Discord server in the description below. Please, join me on this road to seeing what the world of Pokemon has to share with us, and the many mysteries and wonders that keep us all coming back for more.